The crack of a revolver split the morning air as Florence Hartwell stood on the steps of her late father's estate, the smoking gun still warm in her hand as she faced her uncle, Malcolm Hartwell, a man she once trusted but now despised. It was 1878 in Jerome Junction, Arizona Territory, and Florence had just discovered that her father's will naming her the rightful heir to the Rocking H Ranch had been replaced with a forgery that left everything to her father's younger brother. "You'll regret that warning shot, girl," Malcolm snarled, his face reddening beneath his gray mutton chops. "No court in this territory will believe a woman over a respected businessman. You have until sundown to pack your things." Florence lowered the revolver, her chestnut hair whipping across her face in the hot desert wind. At 23, she had spent her entire life on this ranch, watching her father build it from nothing into one of the most prosperous cattle operations in the territory. Now, just 2 weeks after burying him, she was being forced from her home by the very man who had sworn to her father that he would look after her. "This isn't over, Uncle Malcolm," she said, her voice steady despite the rage boiling inside her. "Father would never have left me with nothing. I'll find proof of what you've done." Malcolm's thin lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Your father died of heart failure, Florence. A tragic but natural end, just as it will be natural for his brother to inherit when his only child is a daughter who knows nothing of running a cattle ranch." Florence held her ground. "I've been running this ranch alongside my father since I was 15. The hands respect me." "The hands have been paid off," Malcolm said flatly, "and those who refused have been dismissed. Face the truth, girl. This is a man's world, and you've just lost your place in it." With that, he turned on his heel and strode back into her house, leaving Florence alone with her fury and a desperate need for justice. As sundown approached, Florence sat atop her favorite mare at the edge of the property, a single trunk of belongings strapped to the saddle. She'd spent the day saying painful goodbyes to the few loyal ranch hands who remained, men who had worked for her father for years but were powerless against Malcolm's new authority. Her childhood home grew smaller in the distance as she guided her horse toward Jerome Junction, 5 miles to the east. The frontier town of Jerome Junction had grown considerably in recent years, sprouting up around the silver mines and railroad depot. Still, it remained a rough place where law was more suggestion than mandate. Florence knew of only one person in town who might help her, Judge Wilson, her father's old friend. If anyone knew the legalities of inheritance, it would be him. The main street was busy with the evening's activities when Florence arrived. Miners and cowboys crowded the saloons, and working girls called from balconies. She kept her head down as she made her way to the small building that housed Judge Wilson's office and residence. Florence tied her mare to the hitching post and climbed the worn wooden steps. She raised her hand to knock but stopped when she heard voices inside. One belonged to Judge Wilson, but the other, to her horror, was her Uncle Malcolm's. "I tell you, Wilson, the girl is unstable," Malcolm was saying. "Threatening me with a gun this morning. It's a blessing my brother specified in his will that I should take over. Florence isn't fit to run that ranch, not with her temperament." "It's unusual," the judge replied, his voice carrying doubt. "Charles Hartwell always spoke of leaving the ranch to his daughter." "He changed his mind in his final days," Malcolm insisted. "He saw how emotional she was becoming, how unprepared for the responsibilities. I have the will right here, signed and witnessed." Florence backed away from the door, her heart pounding. Malcolm had gotten to Judge Wilson before her. How many others had he turned against her? The enormity of her situation crashed down upon her. She had no home, dwindling funds, and apparently no allies. As she turned to leave, she collided with a solid form, nearly losing her balance before strong hands steadied her. "Whoa there, madam," a deep voice said. "You all right?" Florence looked up into a pair of the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a well-worn Stetson. The man wore the dust of the trail and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone familiar with hard work and harsh country. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then reconsidered. This stranger owed nothing to her uncle. "Actually, no, I'm not fine at all." The man studied her tear-streaked face with concern. "Name's Jackson Sloan. Most folks call me Jack. Can I help you with something, miss?" "Florence Hartwell," she replied, extending her hand with the formal manners her father had insisted upon. "And I'm afraid my problems may be beyond anyone's help, Mr. Sloan." Jack shook her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Well, Miss Hartwell, I've found that most problems look worse in the fading light. Why don't we discuss it over supper? I was just heading to Clara's cafe." Florence hesitated. She had been raised to be cautious around strangers, particularly men. But something about Jack Sloane's straightforward manner and kind eyes made her trust him instinctively. Besides, she had nowhere else to go. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Sloan. Thank you." Clara's Cafe was a modest establishment at the quieter end of Main Street, catering to travelers and locals seeking a meal without the rowdiness of the saloons. Jack held the door for Florence, and they found a corner table away from the few other patrons. After ordering coffee and stew, Florence found herself telling Jack everything: her father's sudden death, the suspicious new will, her uncle's ultimatum, and her current homeless state. "I know it sounds like the ramblings of a distraught woman," she concluded, "but I know my father. He would never have left me destitute. The will Malcolm presented is a forgery, I'm certain of it." Jack listened without interruption, his weathered face thoughtful. "I believe you, Miss Hartwell. I've seen this kind of thing before. Men like your uncle count on the law favoring their word over a woman's." "Then there's nothing I can do?" Florence asked, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. "I didn't say that," Jack replied, leaning forward. "Tell me, did your father have any other paperwork?" "Business contracts, letters, anything that might contradict this new will," Florence thought hard. "He kept a lockbox in his study. Important documents," he said, "but Malcolm will have access to that now." Jack's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "For now, but lockboxes can be relocated if necessary." Florence's eyes widened. "Mr. Sloan, are you suggesting breaking into my own home, not breaking in, taking back what's rightfully yours? There's a difference." He sipped his coffee. "Besides, I happen to be pretty good at moving around unnoticed." It was something of a specialty during the war. For the first time since her father's death, Florence felt a flutter of hope. "You would help me?" "Why, you don't even know me." Jack's expression grew serious. "My sister lost everything when her husband died. His brother produced a will nobody had seen before, and she had 3 children to feed. No one stood up for her." He paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. "I was off driving cattle in Texas. By the time I got back, she died of pneumonia, working herself to death in a laundry. The children went to an orphanage." His eyes met Florence's. "So yes, Miss Hartwell, I'll help you, because someone should have helped Caroline." Florence reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "I'm so sorry about your sister, Mr. Sloan." He nodded, clearly uncomfortable with sympathy. "Call me Jack, and if we're going to be partners in this venture, I should probably call you Florence." "Partners," she repeated, liking the sound of it. "What's our next step, Jack? First, you need a safe place to stay." "My friend Tom Fletcher owns the livery stable. There's a small room above it that he lets out occasionally. It's modest, but it's clean and private." Jack glanced at her fine clothes. It might not be what you're accustomed to. I can adapt, Florence said firmly. I've helped birth calves and mend fences. I can certainly handle simple accommodations. Jack's eyes crinkled with approval. Next, we need to figure out who witnessed that will. Someone had to sign it alongside your uncle. Find them and we might find our first crack in his story. For the first time in 2 weeks, Florence felt the fog of despair lifting. Here was someone who believed her, who was willing to help without question. She studied Jack Sloane's face, the lines etched by sun and wind, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the determined set of his jaw. He was perhaps 30, with the look of a man who had seen much of life but hadn't let it harden his heart. "Thank you, Jack," she said softly. "You're the answer to a prayer I was afraid to say." His cheeks colored slightly beneath his tan. "Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead, and your uncle doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily." "Neither am I," Florence replied, her chin lifting. "The Hartwells have fought for what's ours since my grandfather first came west. I don't intend to be the one who loses it all." Jack settled the bill for their meal, waving away Florence's offer to pay her share. "You'll need every cent you have," he explained. "Besides, my cattle drive just paid out. I'm flush for the moment." As they stepped out into the night air, the sound of piano music and raucous laughter spilled from the saloons down the street. Florence suddenly felt the weight of her exhaustion. The day's events confronting her uncle, being forced from her home, meeting Jack had drained her completely. Jack seemed to sense her fatigue. "Let's get you settled at the livery. We can start making plans in the morning." Tom Fletcher was a barrel-chested man with a gray, streaked beard who greeted Jack with a hearty handshake, and regarded Florence with curiosity, but no judgment when Jack explained she needed temporary lodging. "Any friend of Jack's is welcome here," Tom said, leading them up an exterior staircase to a small room above the stable. "It ain't fancy, but it's yours as long as you need it." The room was indeed simple: a narrow bed, a washstand, a battered chest of drawers, and a single window overlooking the street. But it was clean, and after Tom left them, Florence felt oddly at home. "It's perfect," she told Jack. "I can't thank you enough." Jack shifted uncomfortably, hat in his hands. "Get some rest. I'll come by in the morning and we'll figure out our next move." He paused at the door. "Lock this behind me. Jerome Junction's mostly decent folks, but better safe than sorry." After Jack left, Florence unpacked her meager belongings, changed into her nightgown, and sat on the edge of the bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear the occasional nickering of horses below. The unfamiliar sounds of town life filtered through her window: distant conversations, the clatter of wagon wheels, a dog barking. For the first time, the full reality of her situation hit her. She was alone in a rented room above a stable, with only a stranger's help to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't get her home back. Action would. Florence reached into her trunk and pulled out the one thing of true value she'd brought: her father's pocket watch. Opening it, she traced her finger over the inscription. "To Charles Hartwell, may you always find your way home. With love, Elizabeth." Her mother had given it to her father on their wedding day, and he had carried it until his last breath. "I'll find my way home, Father," Florence whispered, closing the watch and clutching it to her chest. "I promise." When morning came, Florence woke to the sounds of the livery already bustling with activity. She dressed quickly in her plainest skirt and shirtwaist, pinning her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Her fine dresses would do her little good in her current circumstances. A knock at her door announced Jack's arrival. He stood on the landing holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Mrs. Fletcher sent breakfast," he explained, handing her the basket. "Said you'd need your strength." Florence accepted the basket gratefully, finding hot biscuits, cold ham, and a jar of preserves inside. "That's very kind of her." Jack leaned against the doorframe while Florence ate. "I've been thinking about our next steps. We need to find out who witnessed that will." "Do you know who your father's lawyer was?" "Mr. Everett Hayes," Florence replied between bites. "He has an office just off the square. He's handled the Hartwell legal matters for years." "Perfect. That's where we'll start." After finishing her breakfast, Florence accompanied Jack into town. The morning light revealed Jerome Junction more clearly than her evening arrival had permitted. It was a typical frontier town, a mix of wooden structures and a few more substantial brick buildings, with hitching posts lining the dusty main street and business signs swinging in the breeze. Everett Hayes's law office occupied the ground floor of one of the brick buildings. A brass plate on the door announced his name and profession in dignified lettering. Jack held the door for Florence, the little bell above it announcing their entrance. A clerk looked up from his desk. "May I help you?" "I'd like to see Mr. Hayes, please," Florence said. "Tell him Florence Hartwell is here about her father's estate." The clerk disappeared into a back office and returned moments later. "Mr. Hayes will see you now, Miss Hartwell." He eyed Jack suspiciously. "Just you, miss." Jack stepped forward. "I'm her legal advisor. Where she goes, I go." The clerk looked dubious but led them both into Hayes's office. The lawyer was a thin man in his 60s, with spectacles perched on his nose and thinning white hair. He stood when they entered but frowned at Jack's presence. "Miss Hartwell," he greeted her, "I wasn't expecting you. Your uncle informed me that you had chosen to leave Jerome Junction after the reading of the will." "Is that what he told you?" Florence asked, taking a seat across from Hayes's desk. "Well, he lied, just as he lied about my father's will." Hayes's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation, young lady. The will was properly executed and witnessed." "By whom?" Jack interjected, remaining standing beside Florence's chair. Hayes peered at Jack over his spectacles. "And you are?" "Jackson Sloan, Miss Hartwell's advisor in this matter." "I wasn't aware that Miss Hartwell had retained counsel. Are you admitted to practice in the Arizona Territory, Mr. Sloan?" "I'm not a lawyer," Jack admitted. "Just a friend making sure Miss Hartwell gets a fair hearing." Hayes sighed. "Very well. The will was witnessed by myself and Dr. James Miller, who, as you know, Miss Hartwell, was your father's physician." Florence leaned forward. "When was this will signed, Mr. Hayes? Because my father never mentioned changing his will to me, and we spoke of the ranch's future often." Hayes consulted a file on his desk. "It was executed 3 days before your father's passing. He was ill but of sound mind." "That's impossible," Florence stated flatly. "My father was in Prescott 3 days before he died, meeting with cattle buyers. I received a telegram from him confirming the sale." Hayes blinked in surprise. "Are you certain of the date?" "Absolutely. I have the telegram in my trunk." Jack placed his hands on the desk, leaning toward Hayes. "Seems to me there's some confusion about when this will was signed. I think we should have a word with Dr. Miller, don't you?" Hayes removed his spectacles, polishing them nervously. I suppose that would be advisable given the discrepancy." "One more thing," Florence added. "My father kept a lockbox with important documents. Do you have any knowledge of its contents?" "I believe there were various deeds, contracts, perhaps some personal correspondence," Hayes replied. "Your uncle brought the box to me after your father's death, but it was locked. He said he would find the key and return." Florence exchanged a meaningful glance with Jack. Her father had always kept the key to the lockbox on his watch chain. If Malcolm had been searching for it, he hadn't found it yet because Florence now had her father's watch safely in her possession. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Hayes," Florence said, rising from her chair. "We'll be in touch." Outside the law office, Jack took Florence's elbow, guiding her toward a quieter side street. "This is good news," he said in a low voice. "If your father was in Prescott when that will was supposedly signed, we've caught Malcolm in a lie. And if you have the key to that lockbox—" "I do," Florence confirmed, patting her pocket where her father's watch rested. "The key is hidden in a compartment in the back of his pocket watch. He showed me once, years ago." Jack's eyes lit up. "Florence, this could be the break we need. If the original will is in that box or any document showing your father's true intentions." "But the box is at the ranch under Malcolm's control," Florence reminded him. Jack's mouth curved into a determined smile. "For now, I think it's time we paid a visit to the Rocking H Ranch. Tonight." As dusk settled over Jerome Junction, Florence paced the small room above the livery, waiting for Jack. They had spent the afternoon planning their nighttime expedition to the ranch. Jack had procured a wagon and supplies, and Florence had exchanged her skirt for a pair of her father's old trousers that she'd packed in her trunk. The garment was scandalously improper but necessary for the night's activities. A soft knock at her door announced Jack's arrival. He wore dark clothing and carried a bundle under his arm. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low. Florence nodded, tying back her hair with a ribbon. "As I'll ever be." Jack handed her the bundle. "Put this on over your clothes. It's getting cooler and we'll be out late." The bundle contained a man's jacket, too large for her but perfect for concealing her identity from a distance. Florence slipped it on, inhaling the scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to everything Jack owned. They slipped out through the back of the livery, where Tom Fletcher had left a wagon hitched to a sturdy bay horse. Jack helped Florence onto the seat and climbed up beside her. "Remember," he cautioned as they left town, "we're just going to locate and retrieve the lockbox. No confrontations with your uncle or his men. In and out as quietly as possible." Florence gripped the seat as the wagon bounced along the rutted road. "I know the ranch better than anyone." Father's study is on the ground floor at the back of the house. The lockbox was kept in the bottom drawer of his desk. The 5-mile journey to the Rocking H seemed both interminable and too quick. Florence's heart raced as familiar landmarks appeared in the moonlight. The lightning-struck oak at the crossroads, the stone marker her grandfather had placed to mark the boundary of Hartwell land, and finally, the distant glow of the ranch house windows. Jack pulled the wagon off the main road about a half-mile from the house, concealing it in a stand of cottonwoods. "We'll go the rest of the way on foot," he whispered. They moved silently through the night, Jack's experience at stealth evident in his careful movements. Florence led the way, avoiding the areas where the ground would betray them with noise. As they approached the house, she noted with relief that only a few lights burned inside, suggesting most of the household had retired. "The study window," she whispered, pointing to a darkened window on the side of the house. "It has a loose latch. Father never got around to fixing it." Jack nodded and they circled the house, staying in the shadows. When they reached the window, Jack tested the latch carefully. As Florence had promised, it gave way with minimal effort. He slid the window up and helped Florence through before following her into the darkened study. The room smelled of her father's pipe tobacco and leather-bound books. Florence felt a pang of grief and anger as she realized Malcolm had already begun to change things. Her father's favorite chair was gone, replaced by a newer, more ornate one. "The desk," she whispered, moving toward the massive oak piece that had been in her family for generations. Jack stood watch at the door while Florence knelt and opened the bottom drawer. Her heart sank when she saw it was empty. "It's not here," she whispered urgently. Jack joined her at the desk, examining the drawer. "He must have moved it. Where else might he keep it?" Florence thought hard. "His bedroom, perhaps, Or, a sudden inspiration struck her. The root cellar. Father used to hide valuables there during Apache raids. Malcolm might remember that tradition. Jack nodded. Lead the way. They slipped out of the study and down the hallway toward the kitchen. Florence froze as she heard voices from the parlor, Malcolm and someone else, their conversation muffled but their tones animated. She motioned to Jack to hurry. The kitchen was empty, the fire banked for the night. Florence moved to a trapdoor in the floor, partially concealed by a rug. Jack helped her lift it, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "Wait here," Jack whispered, pulling a small tin match safe from his pocket. He struck a match and descended the ladder, the small flame casting eerie shadows. Florence stood guard anxiously, her ears straining for any sound of approach. Minutes ticked by like hours until Jack's head reappeared at the opening. "Found it," he whispered triumphantly, emerging with a metal box tucked under his arm. Florence nearly sobbed with relief. "Let's go." They had just replaced the trapdoor and rug when the kitchen door swung open. Florence grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him behind the massive oak hutch as a ranch hand entered, yawning. The man shuffled to the stove, poured himself water from the kettle, and mercifully departed without noticing the intruders. "That was too close," Jack breathed, his lips close to Florence's ear in their hiding place. She became acutely aware of his proximity, the solid warmth of him against her back, his arm protectively around her waist. For a moment, amid the danger and urgency, Florence felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. The moment passed as they crept from the kitchen and retraced their steps to the study window. Jack went first, taking the lockbox, then helped Florence through. They ran crouched through the shadows until they reached the safety of the trees, then made their way back to the waiting wagon. Only when they were a mile from the ranch did Florence allow herself to breathe normally again. Jack handed her the lockbox, which she cradled in her lap like a precious child. "Let's get this somewhere safe before we open it," Jack suggested, urging the horse to a faster pace. "I don't want to be caught on the road with evidence of our night's work." Rather than returning to town, Jack directed the wagon toward a small cabin in the foothills east of Jerome Junction. "An old prospector's place," he explained. "My friend Ben lets me use it when I'm in the area. No one will look for us here." The cabin was rustic but solid, with a stone fireplace and simple furnishings. Jack lit a lamp and built a small fire while Florence placed the lockbox on the table, removing her father's watch from her pocket. "The moment of truth," she said, turning the watch over and pressing a hidden catch in the case. A tiny compartment opened, revealing an equally tiny brass key. Jack stood beside her as she inserted the key into the lockbox's lock. It turned smoothly, and the lid opened with a creak of hinges. Inside were stacks of papers, neatly organized. Florence's hands trembled as she began to sort through them: property deeds, cattle purchase records, bank documents. At the bottom of the stack, she found what she was looking for: her father's will, dated just 6 months earlier and bearing his unmistakable signature. "Here it is," she breathed, scanning the document. "He left everything to me, just as I knew he had. And look, it's witnessed by Judge Wilson and Mr. Hayes." Jack leaned over her shoulder, reading along. "This proves Malcolm's will is a forgery, but there's something else. We should look for any correspondence between your father and Hayes, or the judge, that might confirm this is the real will." They continued searching through the box, finding letters that revealed not only confirmation of the will's authenticity, but something more. Evidence that Malcolm had been embezzling from the ranch for years, a fact Charles Hartwell had discovered shortly before his death. "This letter to Judge Wilson," Florence said, holding up a sealed envelope. "Father wrote it the day before he died. It says he confronted Malcolm about the missing funds and was planning to press charges. Jack's expression darkened. Florence, this suggests something far more sinister than just a forged will. Your father's sudden death. You think Malcolm murdered him. The possibility had lurked at the edges of Florence's consciousness, but hearing it spoken aloud made her blood run cold. I think it warrants investigation, Jack replied cautiously. Your father was in good health by your account. Then he confronts Malcolm about stealing and suddenly dies of heart failure. Florence sank into a chair, the documents clutched in her hands. What do we do now? First, we secure these papers somewhere safe, Jack said decisively. Then, at first light, we take the will and the letter to Judge Wilson. If he's honest, he'll help us. If he's in Malcolm's pocket, we'll know we need to seek justice elsewhere. The implications of all they'd discovered overwhelmed Florence. She had come seeking her inheritance, but might have uncovered her father's murder. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she made no effort to hide them. Jack knelt beside her chair, his hand covering hers. I know this is a lot to bear, he said softly. But you're not alone, Florence. I'm with you every step of the way. She looked into his eyes, seeing compassion and something more, a warmth that reached into her core. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, grateful kiss. When she pulled back, Jack's expression held surprise but not displeasure. What was that for? He asked, his voice rougher than before. For believing me, she said simply. For helping me when no one else would. Jack stood, clearly flustered but smiling. You should get some rest, he said. You can take the bed. I'll keep watch. Despite her exhaustion, Florence found sleep elusive. The cabin's single room offered little privacy, and she was acutely aware of Jack sitting by the fire, occasionally adding a log or checking the window. In the flickering light, his profile was strong and reassuring. She thought about the kiss, surprised at her own boldness. She had never been impulsive, especially with men. But Jack Sloane was unlike any man she had known, straightforward, principled, and willing to risk himself for justice. In just 2 days, he had become essential to her world. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's small windows. Florence woke to the smell of coffee and found Jack at the stove, frying bacon in a cast-iron skillet. You cook? She asked, smoothing her rumpled clothing. Jack glanced over his shoulder with a smile. Bachelor's necessity. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep us going. They ate quickly, packed the documents, and headed for town. The streets of Jerome Junction were already busy when they arrived, with shops opening and wagons delivering goods. Jack drove straight to Judge Wilson's house, a modest but respectable residence near the courthouse. The judge himself answered their knock, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Florence. Miss Hartwell, I heard you had left town. Another of my uncle's lies, Florence replied coolly. May we come in, Judge Wilson? We have important matters to discuss. The judge hesitated but stepped aside. Inside, Florence wasted no time in presenting the true will and explaining how they had discovered it. This is most irregular, Wilson said, frowning as he examined the document. Breaking into your uncle's home to retrieve this box. My home, Florence corrected firmly. And the box and its contents are legally mine, as that will clearly states. Jack placed the letter addressed to the judge on the table. Charles Hartwell wrote this to you the day before he died. It explains why Malcolm had motive to forge the will and possibly more. Wilson broke the seal and read the letter, his face paling. This is very serious indeed. Charles suspected Malcolm of embezzlement and possibly worse. My father would never have changed his will in Malcolm's favor, Florence insisted. Not after discovering he was stealing from the ranch. Wilson nodded slowly. I believe you, Miss Hartwell. In fact, I found Malcolm's sudden production of a new will suspicious, but without evidence to the contrary, I had no legal grounds to challenge it. And now, Jack pressed, now we have grounds not only to invalidate the fraudulent will, but to investigate Malcolm Hartwell for possible financial crimes and potentially the circumstances of Charles's death. Wilson stood decisively. I'll send for Sheriff Daniels immediately. Events moved quickly after that. Sheriff Daniels, a no-nonsense lawman with a reputation for fairness, arrived within the hour. After reviewing the evidence, he deputized Jack to accompany him to the Rocking H Ranch to confront Malcolm. I'm coming too, Florence insisted. It's my home and my father's justice at stake. Despite objections from both men, Florence held firm, and soon they were riding toward the ranch, Judge Wilson following in his buggy with the documents. They found Malcolm in the ranch office, feet propped on the desk, her father's desk, smoking a cigar. His face registered shock, then fury at the sight of Florence. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded as Sheriff Daniels entered, Jack and Florence behind him. "Malcolm Hartwell," the sheriff said formally. "I'm here to discuss some discrepancies regarding Charles Hartwell's will and estate." Malcolm's gaze darted between them, settling on Florence with naked hatred. "Whatever lies this girl has told you, we have the original will, Malcolm," Florence interrupted. "The real one, leaving everything to me. We also have evidence of your embezzlement from the ranch accounts." Malcolm lunged for his desk drawer, but Jack was faster, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. Sheriff Daniels quickly discovered a revolver in the drawer, threatening an officer, the sheriff noted grimly. "That's another charge to add." "You can't prove anything," Malcolm snarled as the sheriff handcuffed him. "We can and will," Judge Wilson said, entering with the documents. "And there will also be an investigation into Charles Hartwell's death, given these new circumstances." As Sheriff Daniels led Malcolm away, Florence stood in the center of her father's office, her office now overwhelmed by the swift turn of events. In just 3 days, she had lost her home, found an ally, uncovered a crime, and reclaimed her birthright. Jack stood quietly by the window, watching her. "You did it," he said softly. "Your father would be proud." Florence crossed to him, taking both his hands in hers. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you, Jack." His blue eyes searched her face. "What happens now?" "Now I rebuild what Malcolm tried to destroy," she said with determination. "The ranch, my father's legacy, my life here." Jack nodded, something like sadness flashing across his features. "You'll do a fine job of it. The Rocking H couldn't ask for a better owner." Florence realized with sudden clarity that Jack was saying goodbye, that in his mind his task was complete. The thought sent a jolt of panic through her. "And what about you?" she asked, holding his hands tighter. "Where will you go?" he shrugged, trying for nonchalance. "Back on the trail, I suppose. That's the cowboy's life." "It doesn't have to be," Florence said boldly. "Not anymore." Jack's expression turned wary, hopeful. "What are you suggesting, Florence?" "I'm suggesting that the Rocking H needs a foreman, someone who knows cattle and believes in justice. Someone I trust." She took a deep breath. "Someone I've come to care for more than I thought possible in such a short time." Jack's smile started slow but bloomed into something that transformed his entire face. "Are you offering me a job, Miss Hartwell, or something more?" "Both," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "If you want them." Jack drew her closer, one hand releasing hers to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I've been a drifter most of my life, Florence. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots, but these past few days with you, I've started to wonder what it might be like to find a home." "Wonder with me," Florence whispered. "Stay." His answer was a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening with promise and possibility. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Is that a yes?" Florence asked, smiling against his lips. "That's a definite yes," Jack confirmed. "To all of it." In the days that followed, Florence reclaimed her rightful place as owner of the Rocking H Ranch. Jack moved into the foreman's quarters and immediately began rebuilding the ranch operations that had suffered under Malcolm's brief control. The loyal hands who had been dismissed returned, grateful for their jobs and pleased to work for Charles Hartwell's daughter. Malcolm remained in the Jerome Junction jail, facing charges of fraud, embezzlement. And now, after the doctor re-examined evidence from Charles's death, possible murder, Florence visited him once, not out of forgiveness but to ask why he had betrayed his brother so completely. "You were always the favorite," Malcolm had spat. "You and your mother. Charles never saw my value, never gave me what I deserved." "He gave you a home, a job, his trust," Florence had replied sadly. "It was never enough for you." She left without looking back, determined to focus on the future rather than the bitter past. As spring turned to summer, the Rocking H flourished under Florence's direction and Jack's capable management. Their working relationship evolved alongside their personal one, built on mutual respect and deepening affection. Jack's knowledge of cattle markets complemented Florence's understanding of the land, and together, they made decisions that strengthened the ranch's position in the territory. One evening in July, they sat on the porch after a long day's work, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. Jack had been unusually quiet, and Florence wondered if something was troubling him. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, nudging his shoulder with hers. Jack turned to her, his expression serious but tender. "I've been thinking about the future, our future." Florence's heart quickened. "What about it?" "I know we haven't known each other long," he began, reaching into his pocket, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a single modest diamond. "This was my mother's. I've carried it with me, waiting for the right woman to give it to. Florence Hartwell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Florence's eyes as she looked from the ring to Jack's hopeful face. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." The wedding took place in September, a celebration that brought together the entire community of Jerome Junction. Judge Wilson performed the ceremony on the Rocking H Ranch, under an arch of wildflowers and desert blooms. Florence wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and carried a bouquet of sunflowers, her father's favorite. As they exchanged vows, Florence felt her father's presence, his approval of the man who had helped bring justice and who now pledged to share her life and legacy. When Jack slipped the ring onto her finger and sealed their union with a kiss, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. The reception lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and plenty of the Rocking H's finest beef. Tom and Clara Fletcher beamed with pride, having taken credit for bringing the couple together. Sheriff Daniels gave a toast to justice and new beginnings. Even Everett Hayes attended, having made amends by testifying against Malcolm and helping to secure Florence's legal claim to the ranch. Later, after the guests had departed, and they were finally alone in the master bedroom, now there's Jack took Florence in his arms. "Mrs. Sloane," he said, savoring the sound of it. "How does it feel to be a married woman?" Florence smiled up at him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Like coming home after a long journey, like justice and joy all at once." "I never thought I'd find this," Jack confessed. "A woman who could be partner, friend, and love all in one. A place that could be home. And I never imagined that losing everything would lead me to gaining so much more," Florence replied. "My father used to say that life's detours often lead to the best destinations." Jack kissed her then, a kiss that held the promise of their shared future, all the days and years stretching before them, filled with work and laughter and love. As winter settled over Jerome Junction, bringing crisp air and occasional dustings of snow to the high desert, the Rocking H Ranch entered a new chapter. Malcolm Hartwell was convicted of fraud and embezzlement, with the murder charge unproven but lingering in the minds of all who knew the circumstances. He was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, effectively removing his shadow from Florence's life. Florence and Jack settled into the rhythms of ranch life and marriage with an ease that surprised them both. Their complementary strengths made the ranch more successful than ever, with Jack's innovations in breeding and Florence's careful financial management increasing their herd and profits. In December, as they celebrated their first Christmas as husband and wife, Florence shared news that brought tears of joy to Jack's eyes. They would welcome a child in the summer. A son or daughter to inherit all we're building, Jack marveled, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Your father's grandchild. A new generation of Sloanes for the Rocking H, Florence agreed, leaning into his embrace. Father would have loved being a grandfather. He'd have been proud of all you've accomplished, Jack assured her. Reclaiming your inheritance, bringing Malcolm to justice, keeping the ranch strong. Florence smiled, thinking of how far she had come from that desperate day when she'd been forced from her home with only a trunk of belongings and a determination to fight for what was hers. None of it would have happened without you, Jack. You were the one person who believed me when I needed it most. I'd say we saved each other, Jack replied thoughtfully. You gave me a home when I'd stopped believing I deserved one. As they sat before the fireplace, planning for their child and their future, Florence felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey had been difficult, marked by loss and betrayal, but it had led her to this moment, to the love of a good man, and the certainty that justice, however delayed, had finally been served. Their child, a son they named Charles Jackson Sloane, was born in July 1879, bringing new joy to the Rocking H. With Jack's blue eyes and Florence's determined spirit, little CJ, as they called him, became the center of their world. Jack proved to be a natural father, as tender with his son as he was capable in running the ranch. By the time CJ was 3, the Rocking H had expanded its operations to include not only cattle but horses as well, with Jack developing a line of cow ponies that became sought after throughout the territory. Florence, meanwhile, had become involved in territorial politics, advocating for women's property rights and using her own story as powerful testimony. In 1883, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Caroline, named for both their mothers. The family was complete, and the Rocking H continued to thrive under their shared leadership. Over the years, the story of Florence Hartwell's fight for her inheritance became something of a legend in Jerome Junction, how a determined young woman and a principled cowboy had stood against injustice and won. Young women in similar situations sometimes sought Florence's advice and support, which she gave generously, remembering her own desperate days and Jack's sister, who had not been so fortunate. On the 10th anniversary of her father's death, Florence visited his grave with flowers and news of all that had transpired on the ranch he had built. "We've doubled the herd, Father," she said softly, placing the bouquet against his headstone. "And Jack has added that horse breeding program you always wanted to start. CJ is already showing signs of being a natural rancher. He has your eye for good stock. And little Lizzie, she's got your stubborn streak, that's for certain." The warm breeze rustled the cottonwood leaves overhead, a sound that had always reminded Florence of her father's gentle laughter. "I fought for what was mine, just as you taught me," she continued. And in fighting, I found so much more: a partner, a family, a deeper purpose. I hope you're proud. Jack appeared at the edge of the cemetery, giving her space but lending his presence. When she was ready, she joined him, slipping her hand into his. "All right?" he asked, his blue eyes gentle with understanding. Florence nodded. "Better than all right. I was just telling Father about all we've built together. And all we still have to build," Jack added, squeezing her hand. "The future is bright, Florence. For us, for the children, for the rocking H." As they rode home side by side, the ranch buildings coming into view against the backdrop of the Arizona mountains, Florence reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The loss of her father had led to the threat of losing her inheritance, but in fighting for justice, she had gained something far more valuable: a life filled with love, purpose, and the knowledge that she had honored her father's legacy in ways he would never have imagined. Jack reached across to take her hand as they approached the ranch house, where their children waited on the porch with Tom and Clara Fletcher, who had become like grandparents to CJ and Lizzie. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sloan," Jack said with the smile that still made her heart race after all these years. "Home," Florence repeated, the word filled with all the meaning she had fought so hard to preserve. The sweetest word in any language. Together they rode toward their future, the rightful heirs to all they had built, their love a testament to the unexpected gifts that can emerge from life's greatest challenges. The Rocking H Ranch would continue to thrive under their care, a legacy of perseverance, justice, and the enduring power of believing in oneself, and in finding the one person who believes in you when no one else will.